go ahead and get started. Thank you to Kelly so much for being here. Kelly Blake is the Exploration, Operations, and Geophysics Manager at Ormat Technologies. And in this role, she leads a team of 7 geoscientists dedicated to exploring for geothermal resources and advancing understanding of the subsurface at our operational fields. In addition to her professional responsibilities, Kelly volunteers on the Geothermal Rising Board of Directors and the Limited Geothermal Global Board. And she's previously held positions as President of Geothermal Rising and Global Executive for WING. So huge thank you to Kelly for being here to talk about navigating geothermal markets and your career. So without further ado, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Maddie, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for joining the discussion today. Just a heads up, Maddie and I are in the same room, as you can tell. So I might be looking at her, looking at you guys here, looking at you on the camera, and I apologize for moving my head around quite a bit. But just to get into it, this is a quick statement that describes just how you cannot blame myself or Ormat if in fact you find this talk very inspiring and decide to potentially buy some Ormat stock and it ends up fluctuating. Markets fluctuate. So this discussion is for informational purposes only. Thanks. So we will be doing this Liftoff with WING a little bit different than at least my experiences and the ones that I've watched. So bear with me while I spend the first 20 minutes or so discussing the current geothermal market and why it is so well poised for geothermal. And then just a quick brag about Ormat. Obviously, I'm a bit biased, but we are such an active exploration team, but we're usually famously tight-lipped about it. So I'm excited to just share what we've been working on recently and how that lends itself to the current energy market in geothermal. And then I'll briefly touch on some of the different skills that are helpful as a geoscientist in geothermal, since it's going to then lead into a career discussion and then go through my career path, which I always find to be very insightful and interesting from others. And then launch into the Q&A with Maddie. And then I did want to mention that you all can be adding questions into the chat as well. So if you do have any questions for me, or in general for Maddie or Emily, please drop them into the chat, or potentially others in the actual Zoom call can participate in that as well. So why is it such an incredible time to be in the industry, and what are the driving forces? My geothermal industry experience really started way back when in 2011. But over the last 5 years, we've seen amazing growth in the industry, and really in the last 2 to 3 years, amazing increases in exploration and innovation. So both in the new technology space, but really also in hydrothermal. So there's been a lot of talk about new technologies and advanced geothermal, but here at Ormat and other hydrothermal companies, there's also been a lot of innovation and exploration in the last 2 to 3 years. So the amount of exploration that Ormat is performing right now is unprecedented and very impressive. This is driven by a bunch of different reasons, but I'll start off with digging into the regulatory space. So to date, there are 23 states and Washington, D.C. that have 100% clean energy goals, so 11 states that have adopted emergency energy procurement targets. And California has really taken the lead in this space and is pushing for 1 gigawatt of zero emission and firm power procurement by 2023, I think it was supposed to say. 2028, I apologize. I was like, we should have already done this by now. But when it comes to California, when they put out this 1 gigawatt of zero emission and firm power procurement, that was really a nudge to the geothermal industry that we really needed to step up and provide that power to the Western United States. There are also incentives to develop geothermal from California and Nevada, and the Inflation Reduction Act, or the IRA, includes tax credits up to $27 per megawatt hour for geothermal projects, which is huge. And the current administration just put out an emergency act when it comes to energy that includes language about geothermal. So from a regulatory space, the geothermal industry is really incredibly well suited to thrive right now in this market. So while the government policies may evolve, the long-term outlook remains positive for geothermal energy. So when it comes to demand for electricity, there are several factors that are really driving electricity consumption to record highs today. So data centers, the expansion of AI and cloud computing and digital services has really led to a surge in demand. So some data centers are really requiring 1 to 3 gigawatts of power. And that's enough to power 1 million homes. So they're not asking for tiny bits of power from energy industries. They're looking for a crazy amount of power. And again, that's something that as geothermal energy, we're looking to try and fill that as much as we possibly can. But also homes and businesses are transitioning to electrification from traditional fuels to electric power heating, as well as cooling and appliances. And then we really saw an EV adaptation increase to like 50% in the recent years. So significantly adding to great demand. I know that here in Reno, I can definitely attest to the number of electric vehicles I see on the road. I see the Tesla, the large trucks driving up and down 80 when we go out to our sites. So there's a tremendous amount of electric vehicles on the road today, and you're seeing that increase more and more. And the return of industrial and manufacturing jobs to the United States is also boosting economic growth, but also is creating a need for more reliable power sources as well. So we're seeing that demand for electricity in these spaces. And then lastly, the continued decarbonization drive from large companies. So large companies like Microsoft, as well as Apple, these companies are really looking to directly sign power purchase agreements, or PPAs, with energy producers or from other off-takers to secure long-term contracts for clean energy. So to date, these goals that they have still hold strong, and push for these data centers that they'll be building the goal is for them to be utilizing sustainable renewable energy sources. So we will continue, or that will continue, to set the stage for geothermal to play a large role in the evolving energy market. So really looking at the way that the regulatory space is set up, as well as the demand. And lastly, as we continue to decarbonize, the geothermal industry is really well poised to then step into these spaces and provide that electricity and that power. So before we get into how Ormat is stepping up into this incredible landscape for geothermal power, there's one important piece to the energy discussion that I want to get into. So when you're done working for the day, you might spend your time, and sorry, Maddie, you're gonna have to click through this for me, but you might spend your day cooking dinner, you might spend your day doing some laundry, or potentially just sitting on the couch watching television. My shows right now, if you're curious, are White Lotus and Severance. If you're not watching Severance, you need to get out there and do it. I'm totally guilty of that. But then you make dinner, or potentially do some laundry, or I'm sorry, I talked about laundry, but then maybe record a podcast with your friends or turn up or down your thermostat. All this leads to an increased demand on energy right at the end of the day. So in general, a need for a constant power throughout the day is important, but it also leads to an increase in demand right at the end of the day. And this leads to an issue with the market to date, which is really the duck curve. So this is not a new phenomenon. This is something that has been a continued issue, especially as we've brought some of this more intermittent renewable online, especially solar energy in California. So you're looking at this curve, which is demand over the day. They call it the duck curve because it kind of looks like a duck, but it's continuing to get deeper and deeper into this cavern. But as you add solar to the grid in the middle of the day, when the demand is not high, it drives down these costs in the middle of the day. And then at the end of the day, when everyone is watching Severance or turning up their thermostat or turning it down, that's when we need baseload energy to then fill in that gap. And we need something that's going to be constant throughout the day. So otherwise, we're potentially relying on other types of energy, potentially bringing natural gas power plants back online, which isn't easy to do necessarily, to help fill these voids. So we as a geothermal industry want the actual curve to stay as flat as we possibly can and be able to provide the power to sustain that load all day. And what's interesting about the duck curve from my perspective, being in the industry for about 13 years now, is I remember about 10 years ago that the duck curve started to become an issue, as you can see in 2015, and it's just continued to be an issue. And to be honest, about 2015, we assumed that battery storage and the ability for, say, geothermal fields to then store their power and to release it at the end of the day may have gotten further than it has in the last 10 years, which is just interesting to reflect on, that we're not quite there, and geothermal continues to be the best baseload renewable power source to date. So how is Ormat ready to rise to the continued demand challenge that we've discussed so far? It's worth a quick reminder, and next slide, sorry, Maddie, that the US is the world's leading geothermal power producer. So I will be speaking mostly about US today. I think most of the audience is US, but we might have some international attendees. But really with the increases in innovation and exploration, it's only going to increase. It's only going to increase the amount of power that we are outputting here in the US from geothermal. So the DOE suggests that there's up to 40 gigawatts of untapped potential still in the United States. And I know everybody on the line, as well as here at Ormat, we are working on it for sure. So Ormat is the largest owner, operator, and developer of geothermal energy in the US. We just surpassed Calpine last year with the acquisition of the Enel assets in the United States. And the aim is really continued growth. So specifically in greenfields, we are looking to expand some of our operational fields, but we're really out there doing greenfields exploration. So we currently have geothermal assets in Nevada, California, Oregon, Idaho, Utah, and Hawaii. And we are also an international company with assets globally, but again, focusing on the US here. So one of the main drivers of this push for exploration is everything we just talked about and how geothermal is set up to be so set up to thrive in this space, but also that the PPA prices right now are driving some of that risk and exploration. So back in 2021 or so, our business development group was seeing some of the lowest PPAs that we've seen in geothermal, and that really took an about face. For all the reasons mentioned, power purchase agreements are now at some of the highest levels that we've seen them in the history of the industry, and that's from our business development team, so I'm taking their word for it. But that really drives our leadership here at Ormat and others across the energy landscape here in the geothermal industry to invest in exploration, right? When power purchase agreements are high, when there's all of these regulatory spaces demand lining up, it's worth the risk due to the current energy landscape to invest in exploration, which is a risky business. So investing those dollars into exploration to meet these PPAs is really important and is also happens to be great job security for those working in the geothermal industry. So finding resource to fulfill these PPAs that our business development teams are going out and getting is going to be what we're doing for the next 5-10 years, is making sure that we can meet that demand. So whether you're a contractor or you're working for an exploration team or a developer and operator, there really is a tremendous amount of reasons to stay in the industry and get into the industry right now. So at Ormat, how are we doing that? It's really by drilling as much as we possibly can. So for instance, we have 2 rigs going right now, but when push comes to shove, that includes small diameter drilling. And when that proves out, full size drilling and testing out the resource before we can then develop this field even further. So we have increased the number of wells we've drilled significantly since 2020. And as much as we possibly can, we plan on continuing to do so. So I think one of a great example and a discussion that has come out of Cape Station and from Furbo is the lessons learned when it comes to keeping a rig continuously running. So it provides ample lessons to learn lessons quickly, drill quicker, and drive down costs. So we've seen the same thing in the hydrothermal space, but also in multiple locations. So we have found that while keeping that rig running, while keeping that crew together, learning lessons and doing so in a safe manner also works in the hydrothermal space, and we've been doing that since 2021. So before we get to drilling, just going through quickly our workflow and what it is that we're doing. The team is working hard to identify really new prospects. So our team is going out, putting boots on the ground and figuring out where it is that we'd like to acquire new land with our business development team. So that means collecting new data sets. So sometimes that geologic mapping, I highlighted geophysics because that's the team that I oversee and work with most closely. And then we prove up resource with small diameter drilling into the large diameter drilling, and then lastly, long-term testing. So this is really just to give you a layout of what it is we're doing from the exploration side and how hard the team is working right now to continue to bring megawatts to the grid. And lastly, since we're going to segue into some questions about career, if you're looking for a career in, in the geothermal industry, here are some skill sets for geothermal geoscientists, and I'm sure there are many others, but we're just scratching the surface. But recently I listened to an interview that Ann Robertson-Tate gave from Geothermex, and she mentioned, don't be afraid to be a generalist. So having strong fundamentals are important in geology, geophysics, and geochemistry, and really working in many different types of spaces can be really helpful, and wearing multiple hats is also something that ends up happening quite frequently. I'm sure that Maddie can attest to the times when she puts on maybe her geochemist hat when she's talking to the geochemistry team or the geophysics team, or even the drilling team. So something also we want to point out is enjoying being organized is always helpful from a project management perspective. I just had a conversation with one of my colleagues last week. He was just super excited about everything Microsoft Project could do and how organized it made everything. And sometimes being a nerd and nerding out about managing your time and being organized is helpful. And then lastly, or second to lastly, I think, understanding the risk associated with exploration, as we talked about, when there's more demand and there's higher dollars associated with those megawatts, risk for exploration is something that, say, our leadership and in management positions, they're willing to invest in. However, exploration is risky. Not every well is going to be successful. Not every time we go out and take a survey are we going to find exactly what we need. So being able to pivot, being able to mitigate those risks and then pivot to other decisions and having multiple hypotheses is also really helpful. And that means being creative, thinking probabilistically, and then being open-minded to change when it happens maybe in your project, but also when it happens in the industry, which I think you are continuing to see the evolution of the geothermal industry in a short period of time, which is just quite amazing. So again, just because I find these interesting and helpful for me when others run through them, this is what my career path looks like. On the right is a picture from one of our most recent UAS or drone surveys. We were out looking at some solar panels on the right. And then on the bottom is an older picture of the COSA geothermal field and collecting some gravity data. But I went to school really for geoscience, but I was mainly there to play soccer, let's be honest. But I got both a geoscience degree out of that and got to continue to play soccer. I loved both of those experiences. But after school, I decided that I wasn't really ready for grad school. And I did end up working for a couple of years before I found a graduate school program that I really liked and an advisor that was a great fit at Temple University. And this is really where my geothermal experience began. So from there, I worked for the Department of the Navy for 12 years prior to coming to Ormat last year in October 2023. And over that period of time, there's been a tremendous amount of change in the industry. However, over since the 70s, 60s, 70s, there's been a crazy amount of change as well. And I think we're really at a time where everything is aligned really well for geothermal to continue to thrive in this market, which is just amazing. So there likely has never been a better time than today, with a lot of opportunity for especially early career personnel to jump in, as well as anybody who's maybe early career in geothermal, which might speak to many of you on the line today. So the team, just to put in a plug for the team today that I oversee at Ormat, this includes a geophysicist. We also have a GIS geologist who really helps with the tools and workflows for geothermal purposes, exploration purposes, as well as for our entire business unit. We've also started dabbling in drone use and for exploration and operational purposes, and then also oversee the core logging geologist. So just talking through these photos, in the upper left is a picture from an MT survey, so a geophysical survey on the island, the big island of Hawaii. So all those small yellow dots that you're looking at are the team collecting an MT site. On the bottom left is one of our core logging geologists. Just naturally, that's how they are looking at core all the time, out in the field in the sunlight. Just kidding. But our core logging geologists are doing a great job out there as we continue to continuously drill core for the last 2 years. We also have some drone images in the middle of the slide here. So we have one thermal with 4 people, really just 4, what you're looking at is 4 people. I think I'm the one all the way to the left who looks very cold because it was about 4 degrees out. And then at the bottom right, we have our team out at a remote MT site as well in Nevada. So with that, I just want to mention that the geothermal industry is really undergoing a transformative period of growth. And here at Ormat, I think we're doing a great job driving forward exploration in the hydrothermal space. And I want to make sure that whether you are considering a career in geothermal or seeking ways to contribute to energy transition in general, now is really an opportune time to get involved. So thank you to Wayne US for having me today. Full disclosure, this was supposed to be someone else giving this talk today. but they were unavailable, and I was really excited to step up and help in this space and have this conversation with Maddie today. But I do want to thank Brian Ott for his slide deck and notes. They were very much appreciated. Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today and look forward to the Q&A. So what do you got for me, Maddie?
All right, thank you so much, Kelly. That was really great. Please, everyone who is on the line, feel free to drop questions in the chat, or if you feel comfortable, just unmute yourself and go ahead and ask. But I'll kick off the Q&A session.
Hey, Maddie,
yeah.
real quick, do you want to stop sharing the screen and I'll put it on you guys?
Yeah, sounds good. Stop share. Okay. There we go. Ooh, okay. All right. So I'll kick off with the Q&A, but yeah, feel free to drop questions in the chat. So you mentioned a lot of the positives of the geothermal industry and that we're on this really great trajectory and we're very much poised to take advantage of the energy demand in the US right now. But can you think of what are the biggest challenges that are facing the geothermal industry right now?
That's a good question. The biggest challenges I think is, well, my personal opinion, would still potentially be a lack of understanding. So I think that, and I see some people here from Geothermal Rising on the line, but I do think that that's something that, say, our associations and our non-for-profits are doing a great job working on, getting out messaging about what it is that we're doing. I think that it's hard to understand what is happening in the subsurface. I think we're getting there. I think that there's definitely a broader understanding, at least my perception of the broader understanding has increased over time. However, I think a lack of just generally what we're doing has continued to be potentially a little bit detriment. However, I'll put on an about face and say, I think it's a good news, bad news there. I think that having that maybe people not understanding us over time sometimes had us fly under the radar. However, as we continue to be the best opportunity, at least again, I'm very biased towards geothermal, but as we continue to be the best option from a base load, renewable, sustainable power source, then we need to continue to beat the drum of what it is we're doing here. But I do think that the industry over the last 5 years especially, and anybody else who's been in the industry for a while, has really seen the change and the increase in awareness that, and that's just demonstrated by the amount of people that are online right now listening to this, but then also people that are going to events, going to in-person events, whether that's something in the low temperature space all the way up to the high temperature space. So you're seeing it, you're seeing the growth, but I think continuing to make sure that the entire globe understands what it is we're doing, just as they understand what solar is and what they understand what oil and gas is. That's really where geothermal should be, needs to be. Hopefully we're getting there though.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's been some exciting initiatives too in the last few years to improve our exposure. Like, for example, here in Reno, the new geothermal exhibit at the Discovery Museum. So can you think of any other things that we could do to be improving our exposure within the industry?
It's a good question. I'm just gonna say that about all the questions. Sorry.
It's a tough one.
No, it's a great one. I do think that having the museum exhibit, and I'll put in a plug for the museum exhibit, we kind of duplicated that effort at GR, and they're also moving it around the country. So it was, if you were at the GRC in Hawaii, it was at the museum there, and then it's also was in the Imperial Valley for a period of time in that museum, and it's going to move somewhere else. And Anina can probably chime in the chat and let everybody know where it's going next. But yeah, I do think that those are really helpful to just get it in front of people that aren't scientists and aren't really thinking about, aren't spending any time in these spaces or thinking from a scientific perspective, but then also kind of think pieces and having information out there to a broader audience. And I think that some of the people that have come into the industry over the last 5 years have done a good job of that. So getting their names out there, especially groups like Fervo, as well as inner space, are really then setting the stage for how we as an industry need to continue to get our messaging out to the masses. And I know, I'm almost certain that they're putting in a heck of a lot of work to make sure that their messaging is always out there and that's always on point and really punchy. So that's something that I think has also changed, is these other groups coming into the landscape and maybe having a different way of how they go about business, which has been interesting to see and amazing to see too. Because it gets us into those spaces that maybe we wouldn't have been in otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think.
Not without trying, but yeah.
More exposure means more investment, more funding, more innovations, so that's great. Oh, and we have a message in the chat too from Tracy. Hi everyone, just wanted to let you know that New Mexico Tech will be starting a geothermal certificate program. Oh, and she sent a link too. That's really exciting. So thank you for sharing that. That's great. So kind of switching gears a little bit, since you brought up a geothermal certificate program, let's talk a little bit about career paths. So if you were someone who wanted to make a career change from a parallel industry like oil and gas, what are some of the skill sets or trainings that you think someone should try and pursue to make themselves a more competitive candidate?
Great question. So just keep good. We're all good. So definitely there's a Stanford certificate you can take that's geared toward geomechanical and reservoir understanding. And I apologize if I'm getting that completely wrong. I took it back in like 2013 or 14, but I thought that was a great crash course into kind of the reservoir and what's happening from a reservoir perspective. So I'd advocate for that Stanford certificate. I also know that the team at UNR, as well as it sounds like from New Mexico, are working to get more certificates to put out there to people to be able to then learn about geothermal and all of these different aspects that we talked about, being a little bit of a generalist when it comes to geology or geophysics or geochemistry. So that'll be really helpful, but I think we're not quite there yet. We're coming back around to having these opportunities, but also there's a tremendous amount, or at least a lot more than there used to be, webinars and training and online opportunities for people to get out there and find this information on that's being developed by Geothermal Rising as well as others, but there's a lot available for people today to make sure you're taking advantage of. And but lastly, I want to mention that the heavy hitters in the geothermal industry, I've always found to be really open, ready to share, and willing to talk to you. So just reaching out to some of these people on, say, LinkedIn. I'm not gonna, drop anybody's personal self, but reaching out to these people on LinkedIn and just asking questions. Usually everyone that I've run into in the industry has always been so open to having conversations about what it is you're doing, what you're trying to do. And they probably also have good ideas about other skill sets and training that should be taken on to get into the space. But to be honest, over the last 5 years, again, we've had a lot of people come in from the oil and gas industry. We've had people here at Ormat from the mining industry. And you really can take what you've learned in these other industries and apply it to geothermal. It's not exactly one-to-one, however, definitely a lot of the same information that you're learning about structure as well as mineralogy, how you're finding that structure through geophysics and what you need to learn from your geochemistry, all of that information then from, say, mining, especially here in Nevada, we've seen that a lot, but also oil and gas really does lend itself to getting involved in geothermal. So there are a lot of applicable skill sets to get you into this industry that I think makes the transition quite easy.
Yeah, that's great. I think the point about reaching out to people and trying to ask questions and get to know people is a really good point too. So I think that kind of highlights the importance of networking. So do you think that networking has been a pretty substantial role in your geothermal career and the positions that you've gotten into, being on the board and working with the Navy and then now coming to Ormat?
Definitely. So I was lucky in that working for the Navy, we focused on the coastal geothermal field, but we also did decent amount of other exploration projects, which I then ended up working with a lot of other people in industry. And that in and of itself was really helpful to get me tied in with other people in the industry and learning really quickly from others. One in the Navy itself, in the team that we had there at the geothermal program office, but then other people in the industry who were spending a lot of time thinking about geothermal systems. I got to learn a lot and bug them a lot. So, but definitely, you can't. It's hard because I'm also a bit of an introvert, an extrovert in some ways, I think too. But when push comes to shove, when you get into those situations where you have the opportunity to network, definitely talking to people that you don't always talk to, or sometimes I need to push myself to do when I get to geothermal events and you see your geothermal friends and you want to spend time with them. But you need to make sure you're reaching out and talking to other people and developing those relationships and then following up. I think that following up with people and again, reaching out on LinkedIn or setting up a time to just chat through an idea or a question you had with people always is very useful to then expand your network. And then don't be afraid of leaning into situations that are scary too. So I'd say when I was kind of asked to be on the board of GR, I mostly approach most opportunities with why not or sure, and then get given a lot of responsibility because I like responsibility and I'm passionate about the geothermal industry. But I do think doing things that are scary sometimes is very necessary. It's part of life, and without leaning into scary opportunities, sometimes you do not, they might not come around again. And that's where you need to be ready for the opportunity when it presents itself is important.
Yeah, be scared, but do it anyway.
Yeah, full send.
Yeah. So as an introvert, do you have an opening line for networking events to go talk to new people?
Man, no. Usually I think I tend to bug people that have given a talk. So usually it's, good talk is something that I like to start off with, or someone, usually it's coming in with a compliment about something that I know people have done or worked on, or how I know them is usually the way I'll approach those type of conversations. Yeah, other than that, walking up awkwardly, I guess might not be the right answer, but there's times when that happens as well. So I think it's coming in with a compliment about something that that they've worked on or that they are working on or they presented on is usually a pretty good tact.
Yeah. Tracy, I see you have your hand raised.
I do. So in that light, I'm going to kind of push myself to jump out. And I don't know if any of you saw Velimir Veselinov's, he's my co-founder at my company, his presentation at the Stanford workshop. But our software is getting more and more developed. We have several SBIR grants with DOE. One of them is for geothermal prospectivity. And we are looking for industry partners to develop that software further. So I'm just going to put that out there. If anybody has some data that they'd like to apply some very high level machine learning to, we have some really cool results that you can look at our Stanford paper and see. We were using the geoflight data and doing some pretty cool analysis. So feel free to reach out to me. nvtrace.com is the company.
And what was the name of the paper?
Wow, Geo to go, from Geo to go to Geoflight, something like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Geo to go is what our software is called.
Yeah, I think one of our personnel that were there from Ormat highlighted that as a good paper for the rest of the team to read. So thanks and if you have a link to it too, you could drop it in the chat for people.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll do that. Yeah. Okay.
Awesome. I see Courtney had a question as well. Courtney, do you want to unmute yourself?
Sure.
Be scared. Be scared, but do it anyway.
I'm not scared. Just a little. No, just kidding. Just I feel like I definitely resonated with, your comment on how we come from all these different backgrounds, and it's not necessarily, even though it isn't a one-to-one, that sometimes these things are transferable. So I was curious if there was like a tool set that you thought was particularly useful for that people can be sort of trying to pick up along the way, whether it's like a skill set or like like an actual tool, like, for me, I would say learn GIS, of course, or
Yeah.
whether it's like a skill like public speaking, or just like a couple examples that you can get from any industry that would be useful in geothermal industry.
Great question, Courtney. I'd agree with you. I think that coming in with any skill that you've gained from schooling is valuable. I think that we as a team, especially here at Ormat, we have there are vast differences between what we all spent time on in school, and some of it overlaps, some of it doesn't at all. But I know that there's numerous groups out there, especially teams that are doing exploration or really diving into geothermal with both feet, that are willing to train you up in those more technical spaces. So something that I always advocate for is being good at interviewing is important. So that's a skill that you kind of can grow outside of your skills in school. And the only way you get better at interviewing is to get interviewed and do a lot of interviews and always act super excited to be in those interviews. And that's something that can be hard to do, but I do think, and I've had conversations with others about this. In my time at the Navy, I was there for quite a while. I was there for 12 years, but I interviewed with multiple companies throughout the time that I was there. Sometimes I got offered jobs, sometimes I didn't, but it wasn't necessarily that I was looking for something different at times. It was to make sure that one, my interview skills were continually brushed up on, but two, I knew what I was capable of as well. I knew that I was capable of stepping into potentially other roles, and sometimes I was even outside of geothermal. I was interviewing for positions. So to me, that is a skill that is helpful, and it also then leads to some of those other skills you talked about, Courtney, like public speaking. So it brushes up on one, your ability to communicate what you're working on and how you're doing that effectively, but also then lends itself to having to answer tough questions sometimes, and being in scary situations. So I know I advocate for that, even though maybe you're and I guess people that are interviewing, I'm sorry in advance, but maybe if you're not even looking for a job, sometimes having those interviews, one, what else is out there, and you get a good look at maybe the grass isn't so green on the other side, and some of those interviews and situations can be quite helpful. And I guess that would be my answer to that one, Courtney.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking too, in the terms of, markets and stuff. I know like some of us, like you're saying, have jumped ship from oil and gas. And so just, those, gathering those skill sets along the way, no matter what industry you are, so that you're prepared to, jump on the geothermal if that's where your passion is, or if that's where it looks like the market is going, so you can stay versatile.
Yep. Completely agree. Yeah, and like I've told numerous people before, I lucked out. For me, I lucked out and got a job in geothermal. I was looking for jobs in renewables. I was looking for jobs in the geosciences, but I got my job in geothermal. But if I got a job in oil and gas, then I would have taken that one. There was this path that I'm on was a little bit of luck. And somebody I know, someone who gives me advice would say I shouldn't say luck because you've worked really hard to get where you are. But I felt like back then, a little bit of luck got me that job in geothermal, but and I could have just as easily been in a completely different industry. So to your point, Courtney, I think, having those types of skills that transfer between these types of subsurface, whether you're, technical or non-technical, but having these type of skills that are more soft skills, I think that's great that you're doing this from a wing perspective in these Liftoff with wings. That soft skills then can be applied to so many different jobs and as well as opportunities like being involved in wing or being involved in GR or being involved in any board or non-for-profit space and volunteering in those spaces. having soft skills and being organized and leaning in is all part that helps for sure.
Thank you for the shameless plug for the webinar. We do these every other month. I think that's really, really great. And you talked a lot about technical roles, like you manage a team of geophysicists, GIS geologists, core loggers, but in the geothermal space, there's so many other positions too. Like we have a really wonderful business development team. There's always like HR, administrative positions. So it's more than just technical roles too. If renewables and geothermal specifically are really interesting to you, so.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I agree.
I see Tracy sent the link to her paper. Thank you. And also that they're hiring. So speaking of interviews.
Yeah, there hasn't been, in my opinion, right now, there's so much opportunity for people to get into the industry. People that were in the industry in like the mid 2010s can attest to the fact that there just was an opportunity for early career people to get into the industry. So it's very uplifting and it really then is motivating for all of us here, but hopefully for those of you looking to get into the industry, that there really is a tremendous amount of opportunity. So I would recommend to keep your eyes and ears open when you make those network connections, to continue to reach out, and potentially they have opportunities that they're aware of that maybe you weren't aware of. But yeah, again, don't be afraid to apply for something, especially if some of those skills then maybe you would need to get trained up on, and just being upfront about that aspect of it is that you know X, Y, and Z, but maybe you'd have to be trained up on A, B, and C, but you're willing to learn and you're ready to respond to the demand in geothermal and the demand for additional renewable energy. So that'd be another plus too. I don't know if that's a question or not, but I launched in.
I have a quick question. So we've talked a lot about early career, and I'm gonna ask a question about mid-career, which is not where I'm at, but I know a lot of people are. And so in terms of like watching that the industry grow and expand and the market change, and you yourself maybe can speak to like being a little bit further into your career, what challenges do you see, what opportunities are there, and how do you best position yourself for that expansion of an industry or market?
Love that. Great question, Emily. So that's a great question. And I do say early career, but I guess I'm using that term in a way that's more like early to geothermal too, so that kind of energy transition. But yeah, for a mid-career person, I think someone who, for myself, who's been in the industry for 13-ish years, 13, 14-ish years, all the way up to people that have been in the industry for much, maybe a little bit longer than that, much longer than that. I think coming back to the point Maddie and I were just talking about, which is being ready for the opportunity when it presents itself. So within this industry, we've had to pivot, or I've had to pivot from kind of having a big budget to scaling back that budget and getting back potential budget. So being able and willing to adapt to the situation that is presented in front of you, to do a lot with a little if needed, but also be producing information and valuable work at all times is important. So as much as I really have seen the industry grow over the last 5 years, for sure, that period before that was interesting, and there wasn't a lot of investment in the industry, so that our budget started shrinking, but we needed to make sure that we were still doing good work and getting it out to the industry to demonstrate that there was still some really interesting, valuable, inspiring work going on. So I think being ready to pivot and adjust as necessary. And I think similarly, being ready for opportunities that present themselves when things start to grow and expand, and to grow into that space a bit. So that might mean flexing your technical ability, or maybe flexing your leadership ability. I'll readily admit that when I stepped into this role in Ormat, I was super freaked out and was really scared coming into this space, managing a team of people that were already here and established. So that's something that was really intimidating, but again, it can be really great to be scared, and we're lucky to be challenged those way in time. So I was really scared, but excited to figure out if I was capable of doing it. So it's been about 15 months and I'm still here. They haven't fired me yet. So far so good.
We got another question in the chat from Ayat, and I'm sorry to do this, but can I totally put you on the spot? Ayat asked a question about career development for graduate students. If you're interested, would you be willing to unmute yourself and tell us what you're working on as a graduate student? And then we can get into that a little bit. You don't have to, but I thought I would try.
Nice try. So the question was about opportunities for graduate students?
Yeah, career development for graduate students who are focused on geothermal.
Great. So I know that I'll put in a plug for Geothermal Rising and all that they're doing in the student space. So something that has also really changed recently is there's a great student committee from Geothermal Rising. So go to geothermal.org, and there's a student committee that does a lot of work in this space. So I would recommend reaching out to that team because they would have ways to develop your skill sets as a graduate student, but also again for the networking, from a networking standpoint, it gets you intertwined with other students who are also focused on geothermal, but also there's some interaction between and some mentorship opportunities there, as well as webinars. So they're doing a lot of great work in that space that I think it would be good to reach out and to that team in the student committee. But also some of those other trainings that are out there and being offered. So webinars through Stanford, they have a program or a certificate like we just saw in the chat. There's one from New Mexico. So as the industry continues to grow, there's going to be more and more opportunities, and just taking advantage of as many as you can anyway. I know there's a lot, but ones that apply to what it is that you're doing is important to then again continue to grow and learn and have an open mind about different technologies, different types of geothermal applications. And you never know, the one you log onto that maybe you weren't super interested in to start is the one that really is interesting and helps drive forward your potentially the work that you're doing. So I'd recommend kind of stepping outside your comfort zone a little bit sometimes.
Does anybody else feeling brave and want to ask any questions or make any comments?
I'd like to ask Maddie a question while we're waiting. So I'm curious.
This has never happened before.
Turn around. So in the time that you spent, I know when, and if you don't mind putting it on blast a little bit, but when I got here last year, we talked a little bit about getting more involved in Wing. And so I'm just curious, over the last year or so, putting on these webinars, and you also led a panel discussion here in Reno for Wing. So how has all of that then, or what has your experience been in that space, kind of leaning into the volunteerism in that space? Do you feel, or I don't want to put any words in your mouth, how do you feel about that? How has the experience been?
It's been a great experience. I came into geothermal 3.5 years ago as an intern at Ormat, and I also feel like there was a good amount of luck involved with me stumbling into geothermal. I was living in Mammoth at the time after I graduated from my bachelor's and bartending, and I met a couple of mud loggers who were on the wells that we were drilling at Mammoth. And I was like, wow, that sounds cool. Do you guys think you could help me get a job? And they were like, no. So ever since I came to Ormat and started getting more involved in the industry, we have tons of events here in Reno, like happy hours, we have GRC, and started realizing how great it is to have such a tight-knit industry, and wanted to get more and more involved. And Wing especially, I found really inspiring, and yeah, wanted to be supportive of creating a space for women in geothermal. So I just started asking around, just anyone who would listen, like, how do I get involved? What can I do? And so yeah, I got in touch with Emily about doing the webinars, and that's been really great because I think it's also helped me develop my own soft skills. And yeah, so I definitely really encourage anyone who wants to get involved, just start asking. how you can help. And you'll be surprised how quickly you start getting voluntold to do things.
The world needs good volunteers, so
Yeah.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so highly recommend it, whether it's Wing or GR, or here in Reno, we have the Nevada Petroleum and Geothermal Society. I'm sure every local group has their own industry things that you can get involved in, and it's a really great experience, and you get to meet a lot of really great people.
Yeah, and we'll put in one more plug for rigs. So there's regional interest groups from Geothermal Rising. And if you're in a definitely a Western state where there's probably a rig near you. Yeah, we also have the rigs listed on geothermal.org, and they're putting on events. So Emily is really championing the Colorado rig as well. So there's a lot of opportunity to, again, network in those spaces. And always need good volunteers, definitely. So yeah, thanks for leaning in, Maddie, and asking around. And thanks to Emily, same thing. She stepped into the wing space too, and really has done such amazing work. So awesome volunteers, both of you. So thank you so much for doing that for women in geothermal as well as the geothermal industry as well. I know that volunteering sometimes can be pretty thankless, so I just want to say thank you guys for everything you're doing. That's amazing, and these have been really successful. So thanks for putting them on.
Thank you so much. And thank you for all of your insights and all of your time. I think we still have a few minutes left if anyone really does want to ask another question, but I also want to give another plug for our next webinar, which will be on May 5th. And the title of that one will be Cinco de Wingman. And that will be with Paul Schwering. So Paul from Pacific Northwest National Lab is going to talk about how to be a good wingman. And it should be a really great conversation. So I'm going to drop the registration link in the chat right now. Just go ahead and click it and go ahead and register right now. It's going to be great. Oh, whoops, I accidentally sent it as a direct message. Sorry.
Someone's getting a direct message.
There it is. So yeah, please join us May 5th. It's going to be really great.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, everybody. Thanks for sticking it out. And please reach out if you have any other questions or follow-on questions or need clarification. So thanks, Maddie. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone who stuck around. Good to see everybody.